It's hard for some folks to square the fact that at Nomad Capitalist, we're working with 7, 8, 9, 10-figure entrepreneurs and investors, and yet we talk a lot about emerging countries, and people think, well, those two really don't go together. Today, I'm going to make a case for why I recommend emerging countries, at least to consider, to wealthy people. One of the things that I believe very strongly in the world, having been to lots of different countries, having looked at the global landscape, is you have some countries that are just brand names. We've called them legacy brands. You've got countries like the United States and many of the other Western countries, which are just kind of, in some regards, living off of their reputation. If you talk to people who are in Mexico, for example, and they all want to move to Canada, and you're like, hey, personal freedoms are down, taxes are up, the country's going in the wrong direction. Why people still want to move there? They want to move there because they have this brand name in their head. It is Coca-Cola, it is Prada, it is a brand name. And I'm not saying you shouldn't consume any brand names, but I am saying that if you're going to go to the hassle of moving to a new country to increase your personal freedom, improve your lifestyle, decrease the amount of tax you pay, increase your asset protection and your wealth building, find a place not because it's just a brand name, find a place because it actually works for you. I'm going to share with you a story that I experienced recently and make the case for why you should at least consider emerging countries even if you are a wealthy person. If it's your first time here, my name is Andrew Henderson. I'm the founder of Nomad Capitalist. We are a boutique consulting firm that helps 7- and 8-figure entrepreneurs and investors legally reduce their taxes, diversify and protect their assets, get multiple citizenships, just basically protect themselves using international strategies. We also host the biggest and best offshore conference called Nomad Capitalist Live, open to absolutely everybody. And so this is somewhat a work in progress, right? I mean, this is my thoughts at this moment, having been through a recent experience in Western Europe. And so for me, when I hear people from, let's say, the United States, where I'm from, saying they're, okay, my wife will move overseas. I've been telling her I want to pay lower taxes. I'm getting a terrible deal here. She'll move to Spain, or she'll move to Spain and Italy. Or, we need to find a place that's on the list. Those are name brand places. Now, I'm not opposed to you living in a wealthy, developed country. I happen to have in Europe a particular affinity for Ireland. I've been going there for many, many, many years. Love the people, love the place. I think a lot of people, even though it's a great soft landing for people who speak English and want that culture and want to get along with people, people overlook it for the weather, and I think that's a shame. So that's one country that, again, is one of the highest income countries on earth. You can go there. They've got a tax program for foreigners, so you're not paying the huge headline rates if you've got a business outside of Ireland. You can live there, you can make it work, and that's worth considering. You've got, in the other developed countries that people often look at, though, you've got, let's take Europe, for example. Southern Europe, you have a number of tax incentives. You have Portugal, you have Italy, you have Greece, you have countries like that. You have, Central Europe. So, okay, Switzerland stands out. They have a relatively expensive lump sum tax program. And then you've got Northern Europe, which basically doesn't really have a lot of tax incentives, at least developed Western Europe. So, I've decided in my life that there's no place on earth that's worth living and paying millions and millions and millions of dollars in taxes every year when you could pay zero. Am I willing to pay something? Absolutely I am. At the given time, my lifestyle is there's no one place I'm going to spend all my time. And so because of that, I'm able to pay relatively little. But if somebody asked me to pay more, if that was a condition, I would do it. So the places that I've chosen are very tax friendly, and I didn't necessarily choose them for the tax friendliness. When I chose many, many years ago to put my first base in Malaysia, I actually didn't know the tax policy when I decided on Malaysia. And I just figured, okay, I'll make it work. But I would be willing to pay more if there's a better lifestyle somewhere else. I'm never under any conditions willing to pay $5 million. It's not worth it to say, oh, I'm going to pay 40% of my income or 30%. It's not worth it. If you make 100 grand and you want to pay 30%, I'm not going to judge you. I won't judge you if you make 100 million and you want to pay 30%. That's cool. I just happen to think that there's better, you don't need to do that. There's so many places to choose from. You just don't need to do that. So places like Norway, places like Austria, all the kind of Northern European countries, just no reason to go there. The UK is a rather difficult country to get into, and so there's some programs to work, but every time a program kind of starts to work, then it's just more conditions are added to it. Ireland's a country that works. Switzerland is a country that works, although I think that if you're looking for a place that has these kind of Northern European, kind of Western values, I think a lot of people in Switzerland kind of don't like foreigners. So, Monaco, okay, that works. You're living in France. And if you're from the United States, you really want to live in France, you really want to pay 50 euros for a hamburger and have some guy, be low-key condescending. Probably not. So you've got places like that. you're not going to move to Canada, Australia, New Zealand, despite the personal freedom issues. You're not going to get a deal there. So it's like, at this point, people are like, all right, I want to go to Europe, and so I'm going to look at Italy. Let me tell you about a recent experience I had in Italy. I went to Italy. I was in Milan, which is the place, if I had to live in Italy, I would live in. Housing is extremely expensive, more expensive than in Ireland, where I like the housing a lot more, and there's a charm, and there's actually a lot more people earning good money there to support, I think, the housing prices, which are lower in Dublin than they are in Milan. And I arrived, and there's a taxi strike for 3 days, so you can't get anywhere, and the taxi apps don't work, and some of the apps that do work or would work, there's all kinds of restrictions, because in that part of Europe, like, it's just, oh, we don't want Uber, like, everyone's protesting, and so it's just kind of a pain to get around. And so, yeah, sure, there are ways to get around. You hire a car service for 120 euros to drive you 1 kilometer, and you can say, hey, you'd afford it, what's the price? I like a certain amount of efficiency in my life. And then I'm going to shops, and some of the shops were like the nicest people on earth, like super helpful. I've got a couple stores that I go to that just are only in a few cities around the world. And so there was a jeans store, for example. I went, like the nicest woman on planet Earth, like super duper helpful, fantastic. Then you go next door, and I'm trying to buy a shirt, and the woman's shouting like, we don't touch the shirts in Italy. What the heck are you doing touching the shirts? Get out of the store! Like, you just like, hey, let me just look at the shirt. Don't touch the shirts. Like, what do you do this for? And so, you go to some restaurants. There's some fantastic restaurants. There was one even in that Galleria, which you would think is touristy. Amazing restaurant, amazing service. Then you go to some place. I had my tailor lived in Milan for many years, and he's like, oh, okay, go to this place. And it just kind of felt like, I don't like the vibe. And so, listen, perhaps I'm too much of a Midwestern American, like, Protestant vibe of like, I just like, kind of a certain humility in all encounters. And so if that's not important to you, maybe it's not as important. But like for me, going and like having everybody on strike, and then I'm leaving and like the plane's 2 hours delayed because like half the people at the airport aren't working, and like the ground staff is hacked because they're also on a strike. I say to myself, you can live in Italy. And if you're married, you can pay 125,000 euros a year flat tax. You can pretty much do whatever else you want with your companies. Or you can take advantage of 50, 70, 90% tax incentives if you just want to run a smaller business from there. And so, hey, that's not terrible, right? If we're going into my example of like 10 million, you make 10 million bucks a year, like you pay 100 or 125 grand, single or married. It's not terrible. It's 1.25% of your income. Even if it's 2, 3, 4%, hey, that's worth it from a lifestyle perspective. But to me, I don't see the lifestyle there because I don't have the efficiency. I love the efficiency of Ireland or London or Oslo or those places. And again, some of those are tax efficient. And so you might consider those places. But when I'm looking at Italy or Greece, and by the way, I've actually found Greece to be much better than people think it is. Like, I've actually had a lot of great experiences on a service level and even on an efficiency level in Greece. So I don't have any huge complaints with Greece. But I imagine when you get into the day-to-day life, it's kind of the same thing. Spain, I've had, go to a restaurant that doesn't have wine because they haven't paid their wine bill. Portugal, people are going to. I say to myself, hey, if you like these places, I'm not opposed to that. Here's my concern, right? What if you looked at the non-name brand places? Now, some of the non-name brand places aren't better, for sure. But let me throw this out to you. I have a home in Georgia. I like spending time in Georgia. First of all, if I'm single, I'd rather be living in Georgia than in Italy. Second of all, I think that there's interesting history in Georgia and a lot of things to do. I think the food is substantially better. I know that's blasphemy to many people, but yeah, I think Georgian food is better, saucier, tastier, more interesting, and for me, more exotic than Italian food, which maybe I just grew up with way too many Italians, but like, I just think it's more interesting. And I also say to myself, okay, I can, living in Georgia, get on a flight, and I can go to Milan, and I can do the things at whatever frequency I want that I enjoy doing in Milan for 3 days. Like, I enjoy going to the product store, like in Milan, and like going there, and I enjoy, okay, there's a few restaurants I enjoy, and I can go back to the shops that I like, and like I can do all that. I don't need to live in Milan, and if I'm focused on opportunity cost, I don't need to spend 5 or 6 million euros on an apartment to do things that I want to do 3 days in a month. Like, you're not going to go to the Prada store every day. You're not going to go to the Michelin star restaurant every day. You're not going to go to the sexy cafe every day. And by the way, there's sexy cafes everywhere. And so for me, I detach, and maybe just me personally, I detach from like everybody else is like the sex appeal of things. I like a sex appeal, but I want to create my own sex appeal. And the idea that everyone else has decided, oh, Milan is sexy, doesn't really interest me, and I'm not really willing to pay for it. And it doesn't mean that if you don't want to pay for it, like, oh, you can't afford it. I'm sure a lot of people could afford it, and it's just like, no, it's just not good enough. It's just not, it's punching underneath its weight. And so there's probably a lot of elements in a Georgia or a Montenegro or you name it that are much better. One of the reasons why I love living in Malaysia is you have some of the nicest people on planet Earth that live there, on top of all the consumer conveniences. You can go to Prada, and yeah, listen, if you have big feet, they're not going to have your size half the time, and they will have it in Italy, and so you can resolve that by flying from Malaysia to Italy once a year or once every 6 months or whenever you need to do that. But for me, I'd rather have either something that costs a lot less, where I'm getting kind of the same vibe. Listen, friends in Georgia, amazing. Some of the most loyal friends ever. Easy to make friends there. But on the other hand, if you go to a restaurant, there are some restaurants with great service, and I just kind of I limit myself to that list. But yeah, there's a lot of very marginal service. But at least your tax bill is going to be potentially zero, or at least a fraction of what it is in Italy. Your housing price is going to be a fraction, and you've got an actual economy where people are not always taking things out on the public by striking. I've never been to Italy once in my life where there hasn't been at least one strike going on that's affected everyone's life. And so, like, why do I want an anti-business climate where people are just as unpleasant in the aggregate, where I, am like in this vibe? It's like, oh, why am I paying for that when I can go somewhere else? Or why don't I just flip the tables entirely and go somewhere where it's like, okay, listen, I don't need to be in Europe. I'm going to go to Asia, and like it's going to give, I'm going to have better weather, and it's going to still be lower cost, but not as lower cost, and like you get to choose. And so I think that the idea of having to live in a place that has that brand name is overrated, because I think that a lot of those brand names, especially the ones that if you're going to seek a tax incentive in Europe, are not going to be nearly as good. And so for me, I don't want to have to choose between living in a country where I'm paying 50%, because at a certain point it becomes egregious. There are even more options still. You could live in Dubai, you could live in Singapore, you could live in places that are very developed, but then you're going to probably lose out on some level of personal freedom and just some kind of, some grit, which I think some people like, because freedom is also important. And so when you put all that together, I think it's at least worth considering emerging countries to be left alone, to have people who are more open to business, to people who are more open to just leaving you alone, where things are more cost effective, you can put more money back into your business, back into investments, back into creating generational wealth, and where, quite frankly, you maybe just feel better. I feel better being in Georgia, having an easier time making friends than I would living in Milan. I don't care what the prices are, I don't care what the taxes are, that's just on an apples to apples comparison, better. And that's my personal preference, because I feel comfortable enough in both that I can say Georgia is not some weird kind of, ghetto place. And again, I can also go to Asia, I can go to Latin America. That to me is why I think emerging countries are worth considering, even if they're not your final choice.